Good morning, and welcome to a special meeting of the Budget Committee. And this special meeting is to hear the requests for budget adjustments from the Board of Education. We actually have noted here three separate requests. A requested appropriation of $39,796,000, the bonding resolution that accompanies that for the same amount, and also a release of conditions on an appropriation that we just approved in the fiscal year 24 budget, and the release of conditions is on $1,086,000. So again, what we have is really operating over multiple years. The initial request is an appropriation as an interim on our fiscal year 23 budget. So ED9, BOE, $39,796,000. Is there someone who would like to speak for this? I don't. Tony, are you doing this? Or? So I welcome. So I
introduce this building committee. No.
I welcome James Waters, the chairman of the Old Greenwich School Building Committee. And, Laura has just asked if you would also please introduce any members of the committee that are with you today.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Budget Committee and the BET. I'm James Waters, the chairman of the Old Greenwich School Building Committee. With me today, we have Jackie Welsh, who is the vice chair of the Building Committee, Barbara O'Neill, who is the secretary of the Building Committee, Leander Kruger, who is a voting member of the Building Committee, Jen Benzavengo, who's the principal of Old Greenwich School and an ex officio member. We also have Stephen Selbst, whom you know, who's a voting member of the Building Committee. And then I just wanted to make sure you're aware that the Building Committee's project team is sitting in the front row over here. We have Lawrence Rosati from the Morganti Group, who is our owner's representative. We have Paul Jorgensen representing Silver Petroselli, our architect. And we have Jeff Anderson and Ryan Patrick, who represent Downs, our construction manager at risk.
Thank you. So would you like to explain or update us on your request, please?
Sure. At the risk of repeating myself a bit, because I'm not sure which of you were able to attend the Board of Ed meeting or not the other night, I will give you the high level. So we're here today because we are in the position to submit to the Connecticut Office of State Construction Grant and Review by June 30th. We are on track to meet that deadline. We are obviously, if the BET were to approve this funding as requested by the Board of Ed in a 7-0 vote last 2 days ago, we would then need to go to the RTM. I have been in regular contact with the moderator, Alexis Vulgaris, about that. It is all laid out so that the days actually work. And based on the guidance of our team, we will then have fulfilled every single step that we need to submit to the state on June 30th. Actually, probably the day prior. So just a quick recap on where we are. On June 20th, 3 days ago, the Building Committee unanimously approved in a 9-0 vote 3 motions.
I think 7-0. Is that correct?
9-0.
Building committee.
Building Committee.
Building.
Yep. The Building Committee approved 3 motions. 1, to approve our final schematic design report. 2, to approve recommended modifications to the ed specs. And 3, to accept the cost estimates provided by Downs. We need all 3 of these to meet the June 30th deadline. The Board of Ed, as you know, accepted the revisions to the ed specs. They recommended option A, in our cost estimates, and they approved the schematic design. The one thing I would just start and say is, as you guys all know, this is the next step in a multi-year effort that began in 2018 when the Board of Ed identified Old Greenwich School as a high-priority renovation project for the town. And I'm just going to, the one thing I'd like to pause on, and then we are certainly happy for your questions and certainly appreciate your questions yesterday, is that, this building committee has developed a reputation for getting things done. That didn't just happen. That happened because we have a group of people who didn't know each other, who came together without an agenda except to get this done. Now, we have a lot of different perspectives on our building committee, political, whatever, all different perspectives. But we worked really hard to achieve consensus. I went back and looked. Every single vote taken on the Old Greenwich Building Committee, over 53 meetings in the past 8 months, has been unanimous. Every single one. Now, we were not on the same page necessarily prior to all of those votes, but we worked together, we worked really hard to achieve that consensus. And, I was pretty proud of that, but it's really only due to the team that we have on that building committee and their true focus on getting this done. I'll note that, every time we've gone to the Board of Ed in the last several months, we've had a unanimous vote. Every single time. Every time, the one time we went to the Board of Selectmen, we had a unanimous vote. Every single committee in this body in town government that has so far vetted our project has approved it with a unanimous vote. So with that, I'll turn it over to questions, but I just want to thank the members of this building committee who, all volunteers who deserve this town's thanks and deserve full credit for doing what nobody expected us to do, and that is to do everything that was asked by town government at every level over the last 8 months. And I recognize it might be faster than some of you are used to, but this is how we get things done. Thank you.
So I thank you and every member of the building committee. I think all members of the budget committee have served on a minimum of one building committee, and I think most of us have served on, at least 3 of us have served on multiple building committees. So we know how much work it takes. It's volunteers, and it's working together in a nonpartisan way to get and accomplish the construction. I mean, quite frankly, I think it's amazing the way the town hands over so much money to a building committee and trusts them to complete the project on hand. So, certainly thank you, James, for all your work. So, do we have any questions? Leslie?
I'd like to start by framing the issue and the issues in front of the BET and the discussions that have been had about this particular project, because I think it will help frame the questions that come out later on. But, as we look at this project, clearly the question starts at, and it started at 5 years ago, really, is this project needed and is it a priority? And certainly the Board of Ed voted that way. And the BET has voted that way. The BET has supported A&E funding for this project now in 2 years in a row. The second question that will come to BET members is this the best plan for the long term? Long term being all the issues facing the Board of Ed in terms of enrollment, in terms of what the neighborhood preferences are, in terms of what the educational delivery requirements are. Renovation still leaves the building with spaces that maybe wouldn't be in a new building, the size the right way. And then clearly, I know the Board of Ed is concerned about this, but this body is as well, and that's the financial alternatives that we have facing us. We understand that these are estimates and that it's based on the ed specs that you were given, which is the renovation model. I think this board had questions about estimates for alternatives, if there were new construction, for example, and that's just the financial basis. And then the BET has to think about the means of financing this project as well as the other projects. We know that Central Middle School is also a project on the priority list and coming at us. And the time sensitivity, I think, is the last issue. You know, we've had lots of different information about how the state is going to handle these projects. We've got the June 30th deadline. We have special legislation potentials as it comes at us. And there are risks and advantages with each one. And so I think those are the framework of the questions that you're going to hear. Clearly, issues about enrollment trends are going to come up, I think, and how they impact this project. But I do want to emphasize, and I know I've taken a few minutes just to put the category of questions into context, but the commitments that this board's taken already. This board's taken the $1 million A&E that you've been spending and been using to develop the plans, the $1.086 million to be able to continue to work next year, as well as $1.5 million for interim funding. I shouldn't say we didn't fund on an interim basis, but to address the real immediate problems in the building. And so the question before us will be continuing it down that path versus moving forward with the whole renovation plan. So just in that context, looking at the costs and how you went about the renovation plan and the pros and cons, can you just give us the quick and dirty, the option that was approved by your building committee and by the Board of Ed, what it answers in the building, and then what it does not answer, what's left remaining as far as the needs for the immediate objectives of ADA and security, as well as, and this may not be within your bailiwick, but you probably have information about it, as once you invest this funds, what's left remaining and what's the building like and the future life of that building?
Sure. No, I appreciate that framework. And I certainly have appreciated the ongoing dialogue with BET members about that, so thank you. Okay, just going right at the estimate. Option A is what the Board of Ed recommended, as I said before. That addresses everything in the ed spec. You'll recall the ed spec is focused on ADA compliance. This building will be compliant with the 2010 ADA standards under Option A. Silver Petroselli has certified that. We will be required, actually, we are required by July 6th to go to the U.S. Department of Education Office for Civil Rights, and they will weigh in on whether they agree. But in our view at this point, it will be ADA compliant. It will also have an HVAC system installed throughout the entire building. It will also have a sprinkler system, fire suppressant system throughout the building, which it does not have. It has none of those three as of this moment. It will have a secure entryway. You've seen the design documents. It will have we're proposing to take out the stairs, the front step, which is very problematic, and it. As we've had our discussions with you and before, we believe this solves multiple things at the same time. This building will also get an all-new PA system, important for security. It will also have a brand, all-new electrical system. We are touching all the plumbing. There's a significant amount of plumbing work, particularly in the bathrooms and the piping in the ceiling of the lower level, that are all being touched. So we're touching every major system in this building. The couple of things that we are not touching entirely are listed as alternates in Option A. They are included in Option C that we presented. We are not proposing to do a full roof replacement. I think the building committee's perspective is, we are doing some roofing. We are doing the roof above the gymnasium, above the cafeteria, and above the new addition. We are not doing the new kindergarten roofing, which was done 5 years ago, would not be eligible for reimbursement. And we are not doing the rest of the roof, which was done in 2007. I think, this board could decide that it wanted to do it, to do that in addition. But I think our judgment is that it's not a must-have in the ed spec, so that is not happening in the current plan. Finally, we are not doing a full window replacement. I think our view is that, that money is better spent elsewhere in the project, more important systems at this point. One of the things that's important to know is that in the ed spec, we are not touching the building envelope, right? We are not, and that is, as everybody will know, critical to energy efficiency. And so we're not doing that. So our thought was, if we're not doing that, like replacing windows doesn't necessarily, you're not getting as much bang for your buck in terms of energy efficiency. So the other thing that we are not doing is replacing all of the millwork throughout the building. We're not doing that. We are doing it to the extent it's required as far as finishes and casework for ADA compliance and things like that, but it's selective. So that's what how I would explain what we are and aren't doing.
Thank you, James. I just wanted a couple different things here. First, I'd like to add to Ms. Moriarty's comments that an approval by the BET, no matter how many people approve it, is an approval. And hence, we have the $1,086,000 approval for which we have the subject to release of conditions. But I don't believe either Ms. Moriarty or Ms. Erickson voted for either one of them. So I just want to make that point since Leslie had made the other point. But an approval is an approval. So yes, the BET supported this, and it's very important to us. The other thing, James, I wanted to do is kind of break this a little bit. And just, you introduced many people, but do you have any members of the Board of Education with you today?
Oh, well, yeah, Mr. Joe Kelly.
I see Mr. Kelly out there in the back waving his hand.
I would say I'm with him, not he's with me. So, yeah.
So we have, I'm sorry? Oh, and Dr. Jones. I actually asked about Dr. Jones earlier when our superintendent of schools, Dr. Tony Jones, and our chairman of the Board of Education, Joe Kelly, are also with us. So I just wanted to add that to the people. So, if you don't mind. Do we have any more questions? I'm going to go to Laura. I'll go back to you.
Can I just make a clarification to the comments you just made? You talked about the $1,086,000, which was an extension of the A&E funding. Ms. Erickson and I did vote in favor of that. I think you were referring to the $1,005,000 stopgap approval for an elevator and addressing the laterals of the sewer system. And we're not in favor of that because we favored the full renovation.
Okay, thank you very much. Nisha, I'm sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. I just called on Laura, so I'll listen.
I just want to ask a clarifying question. I want to go to the windows for a moment.
Yeah.
Because when you read the Langen report, which was very extensive, there seemed to be some issues with abatement around the caulking, around the windows. And maybe this is more a question for the professional team, and I know you, in your estimate, you did bump up the cost for abatement and phasing. But what's the cost benefit of not replacing the windows? Is there, relative to the amount of work you have to do for abatement for the windows? And I don't know, maybe you have to abate the windows anyway before you replace them, I don't know.
That was part of the decision. Yes, there's the cost of replacing the windows, but then there would be some abatement required as you do that. Am I correct there, guys? Yeah. I think we are doing significant amount of abatement, as you saw in the numbers. But we're going to be, that is going to be targeted at the areas that we are actually touching in the building, which is pretty standard practice from what my project team tells me on a regular basis.
Just to follow up if I can, and I don't know if you know the answer, but I don't know the age of the windows. I assume they've been replaced sometime between 1902 and now. But from an energy efficiency standpoint, would we, I mean, I'm looking at the cost of the windows, it's 1.1 million, I think, in option C, versus the 61,000 in options A and B. So I'm just wondering if that is, I know you addressed everything, because your original estimate was north of 43, and you got it down to below where we are now.
Yeah, so I'm hearing the windows were replaced in the late 90s.
Late 90s?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, thank you.
But and look, there's a lot. There's as with any project, there's must-haves and there's nice-to-haves, and I think as the building committee was considering all of those, we erred towards things that were in the spirit of the ed spec in terms of ADA compliance, in terms of HVAC, right, in terms of security, and less towards things that, if our engineers had said, you got to replace these windows, we would have done it, right? But that's not what we were told.
Anisha?
Thank you. I want to start by thanking you, James. I know you've put an incredible amount of time in leading this committee and getting us to, I think I read there were 50-plus meetings to get us where we are today. So I know there's a huge commitment by you and your team to get us there. I also want to reiterate the commitment of this board to move this project forward. We're here today because we all want this project to move forward. I think and I hope, also want to thank all the parents and kids I see in the audience. I hope no one's cutting school to be here today. I hope school's out. But I really want to thank all of you for your advocacy. And I hope you take the discussion today as dialogue and really us trying to understand this project better to make sure we follow the best process to get the best execution. So please keep that in mind as we ask our questions today. There is a full commitment on this entire board to move this project forward. The questions today are really just to help us get to the best spot. With that in mind, James, you outlined the three options, option A, B, and C, and kind of discussed a little bit of what was in option A and what was not. Can you just specifically outline what is in option B and C? And just be very specific so we know what the incremental dollar is buying us, and then I'll ask some follow-ups while you're addressing those.
Thank you. Great question. So option B, we called that enhanced compliance. As you see, really what it is, what it comes down to are some enhancements to some of the MEP systems. So as an example, for a generator, rather than an emergency generator, you're getting a little bit more, you're buying a little bit bigger of a generator. It's that kind of thing. When we originally were doing this, we were going to have contemplating a different framework, but basically at the end of the day, we decided that B, focusing on MEP upgrades, was really the right thing. And then option C is really, frankly, it's doing most of those things that I flagged as alternates. Those are the big ones. But there's just, it's just a little bit more of a comprehensive renovation. Now, it is not a renovate as new, right? It is not touching the building envelope, and which a gut renovation, right? It is not. Option C is not that, so it does fall short of that. I think if you were talking about a full gut renovation, which is outside the scope of the ed specs and what the Board of Ed has tasked us to do, you'd be talking quite a bit more, and then you'd be probably talking about a project that is apples to apples with a new construction in terms of dollar values. So I'm happy if my team wants to highlight any other specific things, but I think the ones that I would flag to you are, you're doing the full roof, you're doing the full windows, you're doing the full millwork scope. You're having.
I'm sorry, that's an option C. You are doing that?
Right.
Okay.
In option C, you're doing the full upgrades to even beyond option B for the MEP systems, right? So a whole building generator, right? And each of those things has a cost. So I think that was not necessarily that was beyond the scope of the ed specs in our view. So that's why we put it in option C.
So just to, Leslie, if it's okay, just want to clarify. So the difference between option A and B is roughly about $2 million, and And what I'm hearing you say is it's just, in some sense, better mechanicals, better systems, a higher quality. You use the word enhanced compliance, so that implied to me was that option A wasn't fully compliant.
Yeah.
And this is just getting us closer to that. So I want to make sure, I think you addressed it up front. Option A is getting us to 100% compliance. Maybe the word enhanced compliance is a little misleading. Maybe we can say, better options, that's fine. Option C, there's a difference of 7 or 8 million. And it looks like what we're getting with that is the full roof and windows,
Yep.
which you, I think, opened by saying may or may not be needed since some of that was done before.
And yes, that's right. And one of the things I would just say is, you guys know, you appropriate quite a bit of money every year on public building maintenance. It's just something you got to do, as you know, and this building will require ongoing maintenance, just like any other public building, and over a set time. But I think in our view, this project was really our mandate was really targeted at bringing Old Greenwich School up to the sort of the basics that we should expect in every school in our town, and so that it can last for another 100 years, right? That's what this project is, and explains some of the things that we looked at alternates, because look, you guys have prerogative, I think, as to replacement schedules and things like that, and if it makes it easier for you to do a full roof replacement now, then so be it, and that's why we put it in as an alternate.
Thank you.
So I wanted one question that's been asked of me is, as you do all this work, and this very substantial work, we'll talk about substantial work, is there any question about the impact on the integrity of the curtain wall, in terms of whatever? It's my understanding there was some issues as we move towards Hamilton Avenue School, and so I just want to make sure that lessons learned are being considered or addressed. And so I don't know whether this is something that you have discussed in your building committee, and if you haven't, you can certainly come back to us. I think there's a long time, moving ahead here, but I am interested in the response to that question.
Yeah, look, we've had engineers looking at all of all facets of the structure. You may be aware, we just cut a big check for all of their work, their good work, and I think the reporting that we have gotten is that the fundamental structure is sound, right? Just like a lot of things built in the early 1900s, built to last, right? And so, I think we have not seen any indications thus far that is an issue. I think, look, one thing I highlighted to the Board of Ed, and it's only fair that I highlight it to you, is this building, these gentlemen sitting in the front row are sitting there because this is what they do, right? This is the type of project they do. The exact project you are looking at is the type of things they're really good at, right? And that's why the building committee chose these guys. And so, we're going to constantly be looking to them, as you know, when there's renovations. It's why we have a 20% contingency in here, right? And when you go through this process, we're going to continue to find things, and we're going to continue to sort of make adjustments as we go. And fortunately, we have a lot of we have 6 to 8 months to go in the pre-construction process, where our objective as our owner's rep constantly reminds us is we got to understand the existing conditions. So we talk about it all the time, and thus far, to your specific question, we haven't seen any indications that that's an issue.
Can I ask one more question? So I want to also ask, to what extent is there a dialogue with the director of facilities? I mean, is he sitting at your table? I think one of the, hopefully we're going to say very successful, but we can go on and on, whether it's the Byram Pool or now working on Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, the dialogue that occurs between, construction, in both of these cases, it was new construction, but as you know, the town also does a lot of renovations too. And But it's that dialogue between investing the capital and then how it will be to operate, and the simplicity to operate, and the consistency with the, instructions to the maintenance staff across the board and so forth. So my question is, to what degree are you working with, or is our director of facilities for the schools, attending your meetings, being involved, and, you're looking to not only the construction, but the maintenance thereafter?
Yeah, it's a great question. So Mr. Watson, whom you're referring to, it's funny, I often see him during our building committee meetings. Which occur as he's driving to work. So I often see him on Zoom with his steering wheel turning. He keeps the video on for some reason, but it's kind of humorous. Look, we have had ongoing dialogue with him. I think, I think today he's on vacation. But there was a rush yesterday to get some signatures from him, so we made sure we were on track for June 30th. There's a lot of that going on right now, look, the work we're doing, as I told you when we sat down, I guess it was last week. The work we're doing in terms of engineers scouring the building, like we know a whole lot more about this building now. And Dan has been fantastic in terms of then bringing us from where we are to present to what's happened in recent years. So when we were doing our most recent round of cost management a week ago, one of the things that Dan had communicated to us is, I already replaced most of the LEDs in this building. We don't need to be spending $1 million on LEDs. We already replaced all of them. And so we said, okay, like we don't need to be paying for that. You'll see that there is an allowance in there for LEDs, just because as we're doing things like installing HVAC and as we're doing things like installing sprinkler systems, stuff's going to happen. Hopefully we can keep all of the LEDs and have that allowance go away, but we just felt to be prudent, we should leave. So there's things like that. The dialogue on the roof, the information I just told you on the roof is directly from Dan Watson, combined with what we've now heard from our team. So, there is a regular dialogue. I think one thing you should rest assured is that when we're installing, we're not installing some, I know there are people who think we should be installing like net zero, making this building net zero or whatever it is, or geothermal or solar panels, all of that type of stuff, which would be fantastic, right? But we're not installing those types of systems. So the types of systems we're installing are things that we have and are used to, across the district. Of course, they're kind of will be new, which would be great. And as you know, Old Greenwich hasn't had a major capital project in almost 30 years now.
So this is sort of off mark, but I don't know whether you checked with Steve, but the town does have drawings on at least 3 of those renovations.
Okay.
And so I'm sure if you ask him, that he can have copies made,
Yeah.
delivered to you. But there are 3 separate renovations where the town does have all the drawings. And you may, even though I know you've done all this work, which is what you said you've done, you may learn some things from, these drawings that you might not have anticipated, or maybe slightly different or whatever. But anyway, I mean,
Awesome.
I only found out late yesterday afternoon, so, I'm not.
Thank you. That's great to know. And
And I'll follow up with an email, so you jointly.
you don't need to, because I'm sure Lawrence has already written it down as something that he's going to go and chase and get done. And he's going to make Paul Jorgensen and the Silver Petrocelli folks pretty happy, because as you know, the next step here is pretty intensive, right? The next step here is design development. This is very standard. Actually, a lot of towns go through design development or even schematic design after being on the state priority list. We're doing this before, so we're really ahead of the game, but there's a lot of in-depth work in terms of design development process in which there's drawings. You saw there's like 160 pages in that schematic design. It's going to be twice as much in design. Yeah, so yeah, 2-3 times as long as we develop the drawings further. So thank you. We'll take you up on that, and we'll figure that out.
I don't know who was first. Correction. You're first. Laura was first, and then we'll come back to you.
Oh.
So I just want to note for the record that Dan Watson, after he leaves Old Greenwich Building Committee meetings, hops onto the Central Middle School Building Committees right afterwards. So just, he
Yeah.
is busy.
No, yeah, and we're always done in an hour, so he makes it on time, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I just want to commend your team, because I was able to listen to the BOE meeting the other night. Thought it was a very thorough, comprehensive presentation that went through all of the major issues. I'm quite comfortable. Although I think when we get to the release of conditions, I'd like to go through that document that outlines what a potential cost of a new school would be. I do want to know for the record, we had asked some questions that the building committee responded to in writing, and I'd like that document to be posted and made available, if that's okay, so we don't,
Oh, that's okay. I
Just
mean,
for
it's
the-
fine with me. I
just
mean,
for the public
right.
record, so we
If
don't have
if
to
it-
repeat
It
them.
may be posted already, I don't know, but we can, after the meeting, make sure it's posted.
That'd be great. And then lastly, I just want you to comment, one of the issues in option A and all of them is the cost of delaying. I mean, I commend the entire team for getting to this point of schematic design. But the $3 million cost, if we don't do this project, if you could just touch on that point, because I think that's a critical point.
Yeah, no, it is important. I think, it's important for all of us to just be aware of the reality of cost escalations in terms of construction. And look, we hired Downs as our construction manager, not only because of their expertise in managing a construction process, but also their expertise in terms of the estimating process. And, they're, Jeff and Ryan here, it's funny, I've seen I'm pretty decent at spreadsheets because it's my paying job. But Ryan, it takes it to a whole different level. And so, these guys understand pricing, unit pricing. That's a bit what our estimate was based upon. And, they're working on and estimating a bunch of jobs, regularly on a regular basis. And worth noting also that our estimates were, there was an independent estimator, a third-party estimator called PM&C in Boston that also did estimates alongside Downs. And so, one of the things that they came to us and I said, guys, we need to know what is the impact of starting in June 2024 because we're on the priority list, or starting in June 2025 because we have to wait a year to go to the priority list. And they said, this is what the dollar is, right? This is the escalation that people are looking at now. One of the things I think is obvious to everyone, I hope at this point, is that since 2020, construction cost escalations have been unprecedented. Jeff, said that at the Board of Ed meeting, unprecedented in that time period. Now, he has said it's coming down a little bit, but it's still an issue, right? It's not gone away. And so, yeah, I mean, in our estimate, basically, it says it right there as an alternate, which I don't know if that's the right way to list it, but it adds $2.9 million to the cost of this, $2.931 million to the cost of this project. And I'll just note, because this is in our one of our meeting minutes, is that that right there takes care of the roof that you're and maybe half the windows, right? So. If you wanted to do a more fulsome, I think I would ask you to consider if you wanted to do a little bit more of a fulsome renovation, maybe it's better spent on that than cost escalations.
Is there any more questions? I'm not sure, Nisha and then Leslie.
I just wanted to, just going back to, you kind of talked about some of the things that this project does not include, in terms of just focusing on option A for a moment, since that's the one we're on. Things like, layout and ceiling height, for example, those are things I'm assuming are not being touched in, buildings this, and maybe you could, I'm assuming it's no. The layout of the building, meaning other than the new addition, there's comments in the ed specs that the layout of this building is actually not that great, just considering the back and forth. But some of those things you just can't address, right, in a renovation, right? Ceiling height, which I'm presuming is lower than what would be normal today. These are little people, so maybe that's not as relevant. But I'm assuming things like that are not being touched in this renovation because those disturb the structure of the building.
It's a great question, and I can hear the activity behind me because they know this. They are gurus at this, but I will give it a good shot. We actually, there is quite a bit of reshuffling of the floor space, the floor plan in this project. I would point you to drawing A100, which is slide 90 of the schematic design report that you received. And, to the extent anybody is interested in looking at that, there are quite a bit of changes going on here. So yes, you're right, absolutely, the new addition.
I guess let me just focus in on the point that I'd like you to address.
Oh, sure. Sorry.
No, that's okay. Really what I'm thinking about when I toured the school was that some of the hallways were a little bit narrower, some of the spaces were a little bit narrower. In full disclosure, my best girlfriend has MS and is on a scooter, so I traverse spaces very often with her. To me, that was a challenge. It potentially could be a challenge. Are those, as part of ADA compliance, I know while you may be compliant, are those some of the things that this renovation will be able to address? And I'm just thinking through kind of from a very real perspective of having to move, structural beams or whatnot without disrupting this building. And really not just from a compliance, because you might be compliance because it's right, but it's not where it would be today if we were to think about how to build this space.
Sure. Yeah. So I appreciate that, and I'm sorry, of course, to hear about your friend. But look, there's a lot going on here, right? In terms of that type of ADA compliance. Could a person in a wheelchair navigate this school? Easily. The answer is unequivocally yes, under this design that I was referring to on drawing A100. So they will I'm just going to give you a quick path because I think it's important and it addresses a bunch of the different things. As somebody is rolling up to the front door at Old Greenwich today, they're sort of I have to go around by the dumpsters to get in, right? Under the design that the final schematic design that the Board of Ed approved, they will go in a new front door, right? That will be there at ground level, right? And they will walk through what is all of a sudden a double height entryway. You all recall how at that lower level of Old Greenwich it's kind of, I kind of have to duck a little bit or feel like I need to. We're going to be addressing that. So we're going to be raising the piping so that it is a more appropriate, the piping that's in the ceiling above it, so it's a more appropriate ceiling height. The addition that we're doing is going to improve the flow and the circulation around the building, so you don't get to one end and then have to go all the way, turn around and go all the way back. So that circulation is now a loop. The hallways are wide, particularly, as you go into the newly accessible second floor and now third floor, which will have an elevator going there, and it will be, the entire floor will be compliant with the standards, and those hallways up there are actually really wide. And the rooms that are reshuffled as a result of all of this, so the office goes right down to the lower level. Right now it's on the first floor. a lot of the room, the nurse's office is now downstairs as opposed to up. So there's a lot of reshuffling, and the good news is we won't be have any kids going to in classrooms in closets any longer, which I think is obviously the right thing. And I think I covered most of it. All right.
So, thank you. Leslie, did you have one last question? I think it's about ready to move on.
I did, and I guess I spoke first, and I get the last question.
Well,
But the estimate
not
that's
necessarily the
provided,
last comment, but the last question.
I think it's helpful to be very clear on what the contingencies are still in this project. This board's fully aware that construction costs have been increasing over the years. I think we certainly had to increase the appropriation for Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, for the high school vestibule project, even though that's very small. We saw that the Glenville corridor improvement project's on hold because the costs approved are below what the current estimates are. We certainly know that the Central Middle School cost is certainly under discussion and very different than what some of the budget members believed it should be. So we know costs are increasing. We know that this estimate is the best that you can do based on the designs and the schematic designs, if you will, which still need a lot of work to get to construction documents are. And so you do need to leave contingencies. Can you just review what those are?
Absolutely. Three major items that are contingencies baked into here. One is a design and estimating contingency. Downs, our construction manager at risk, who specializes in these types of projects, uses 15%. These are items that, as we go through our drawings, and there'll be as the drawings get to the next level, there will start to be various costs that come into the project. I think in my mind, I'm looking at that and being like, I want to avoid as many of those as I can. Right. Second is a construction contingency that is for the construction manager. That's baked into their response to our RFP and is set. And then there is a 5% owner contingency. So if you add those up, that's 23%. I think on this front, I have obviously been told regularly that an appropriate contingency for a renovation project is in the ballpark of 20%. And so, I'm having to rely a little bit on the judgment of our construction manager at risk, and that's why we're at 23%.
And if I could just ask one question about how we're going to proceed. We have several different motions, but Ms. Erickson made the reference to the estimate that was made available for a new building. And I know that that's an issue that members of this board have raised. Is it worth reviewing that now, or do we?
No, I don't think, that just came in last night. I think that's, quite frankly, I haven't spent the time on it that I should, but.
But we can get some background now. If it's going to influence the vote on this interim, then I'd like to get that, as much information about that out in the public.
Okay, so I'll ask. I will come to answer your question, but can I just make one comment on something else you said here, just so we can, make sure we're framing things before I forget that. And that is about the contingency or the escalation of costs. So in terms of overall escalation of costs, on each of these projects, at least I'm going to pick the ones like Eastern Greenwich Civic Center, Senior Center, the GEMS building out in the northwest corner. Through this period, I agree with you, the costs have gone up. You'd know more about the vestibule, but it's approximately 25% in terms of all of those three major projects. But as I see this, I've seen the costs, I think they're going up something like 84%. So I just wanted to make that comment before we leave this. But I'm also going to say Nisha, do you want to talk about the new project? I don't, the new build. I think this is about what you're coming in. I mean, let's be clear that right now, what is approved for the building committee takes this building committee, not only have the funds address the schematic design, they will also be available to address design development, and then they are also fully approved for all construction documents and should be sufficient to take this project through MI and through everything that's needed to finalize the actual construction bids, et cetera. So I wanted to make that comment. Nisha, do you want to talk about the new project, or is that, I mean, I don't think that we're ready to do that. This board did ask for an estimate on new build. That's not here yet. We haven't received anything from whoever is working on it. It's not me. But I'm not ready to talk. It came in yesterday, very late. I'm not ready to talk.
Yeah, I was going to say, I took a quick look at it this morning, less than 15 minutes, so I haven't gone through it thoroughly, but I did spend a significant amount of time looking at what those costs would look like for our town. But I'm happy to hold off on that until the full committee is there for the benefit of the full BET, so they can also hear that dialogue. So I'm happy to wait on that. I do have a few comments to make if we're about to vote, because I see we're
Well,
about to wrap
I
up.
want to ask Laura the same question, okay? Laura?
I think we have to just distinguish between what the BET had for a cost estimator for this project versus what was discussed at the Board of Ed meeting the other night, which was, it was presented as a back-of-the-envelope estimate. I think it was much more than a back-of-the-envelope estimate. I thought there was a lot of good analysis in there. So when I was thinking we could talk about it whenever anyone wants to, but I do think we should talk about it, particularly as it relates to the release of conditions for the $1,086,000, which is also on our agenda. Okay. And I do just also want to note on the topic of contingencies, you also have escalation in here from now till next year, right? You have a 7% built in.
Correct. I'm not really calling that a contingency at this point, because I think that's, would be baked into card cost. And if it comes, as you know, there's going to be several rounds of estimates taken as we go along here before we go out to bid. And so if costs end up coming in lower than that, hooray, we're all happy.
Laura, just for the benefit of the audience, the release of conditions that Ms. Erickson is referring to that the BET requested an independent estimate from our board for both this renovation and a new build.
I don't think we're to that. We can.
No, I'm just saying for the point is we have not yet received that. That should come in the next few weeks. That is what we are waiting on. So the question really that we are going to address later today is, should we release that condition and bypass that process? And
But we will come to that with
we'll
our
come to that
third,
when we get to that bullet point.
our third
Yeah.
item.
Yeah.
So, I don't know, any further comments? I mean, I don't know where, are we
you about
ready to vote?
Are you going to take the vote?
Nisha, would you like to make a motion?
Well, I'd like to just make a comment, and I just wrote a couple points down before we do vote. I think it's undeniable that this old Greenwich project needs to be renovated as soon as possible. Our children and their education is the most important priority, and your presence here today, all of you, parents, teachers, educators, your presence today confirms precisely this. There are two aspects to the decision to approve this funding request that's in front of us today. One is philosophical. Is this a capital investment that's needed? And the answer is a resounding yes. The other aspect is technical. Should we allocate $42 million before we have all information, and would that lead to an expeditious build of this school? My colleagues here today are suggesting that this being a critical project, let us dispense with due process, because that will delay the project and not be beneficial. In most projects, we have 3 phases to execute a project. We dispensed away with most of those phases to expedite this project. In this case, we are asking for a separate estimate and a comparison with the new build. My esteemed colleagues and I are suggesting that some of those steps are unnecessary and should be short-circuited. Best decisions are made when we listen to each other, focus on facts and evidence, and discuss with an open mind and with rigor. I'm here to do that. I'd like to listen and ask questions, which I have done today. Perhaps the right idea is to throw process to the wind and approve this request. I'm going to abstain on this vote for today in this budget committee, so I can listen to the arguments that are made by the rest of my colleagues and look at all the facets of the issue and make a decision later today in the full meeting. I do want to really let this community know we are here to listen and answer questions and ask questions and get more information. So I hope I'm kind of letting you know where I am on this, at least for this morning, but I will make a final decision later this morning.
So I probably have some comments of my own here, but I would also like confirmation that if the $39,796,000 is approved, that the BOE is confirming, and I believe that Blaze has already done this with Roland, that it will close the two fiscal year '24 appropriations for Old Greenwich, the sewer maintenance of $500,000 and ADA compliance of $1,003,000. Is that correct, Tony? So Dr. Jones has just confirmed that, Roland, which was already confirmed between Mr. Geiger and Mr. Leviton. Again, I support continuing the plan to move aggressively forward with the Old Greenwich School renovations. I think this building committee is very focused. I commend its chair and its volunteer members. But, in my opinion, this project is premature to move forward as presented. The building committee should continue its work. It has its funds. It's funded in both the fiscal year '23 and the fiscal year '24 budget, and that allows for MI approval and the completion of its construction drawings and preparation for construction consistent with the town charter requirements. I have other comments on this if we need details, but, I will not be supporting this at this point in time. I don't know. Do we have a motion? Nisha, do you want to make a motion?
Can I make a comment first on process, and then you can call on whomever you want for the motion? Just on process, typically the Budget Committee tries to get all the information on the table to have the discussion about the information. I'm understanding that you're expecting a different process today. We do have the full BET meeting in an hour and a half, and that potentially may be where the new build information is put out there. I'm kind of surprised that we're not putting it on the table this morning, that we are able to ask our questions about it and understand it a little bit today before 11 o'clock, because how do you vote on well, you've made up your mind, and you've made up your mind, but how do you vote on the renovation budget without having the full information available? So I'm a little bit challenged on the process, but that's fine if that's how you want to proceed. I'm willing, I'll make the motion to approve the additional appropriation for the Old Greenwich School expansion and renovations for $39,796,000.
Do I have a second?
I'll second.
So Laura second. So just making comments here, what we have before us is the renovation project, and that is what our building committee has been working so hard on. And again, there is sufficient funds to move forward with that alternative, as for the next more than fiscal year, I guess we have, because we're not even into the availability of the fiscal year '24 funds. There's a process that we all know that's in place. And Leslie, you have been on building committees, Laura has been, I have been. We also know the town process. It doesn't make any difference whether it's the Eastern Greenwich Civic Center or the future ice skating rink. We have to keep to municipal improvement. We're waiting, et cetera. I mean, it's very clear. That states that the approval of construction funding is premature and non-compliant with Charter Section 99 municipal improvements approval. And then the applicable paragraphs are A, after the passage of this article, and that was in 1951, no action other than the making of studies or surveys shall be taken by any town agency, the Board of Education, or the Housing Authority on any proposal involving the major redesign of public real property or public buildings, including schools, until such proposal has been submitted to and approved by the commission or has been approved by the representative town meeting as herein provided, and that section is section 100, not section 99. So, I mean, I can make other comments here too, but at this point in time, we requested, well, it's actually quite a long time ago now, the BET approved getting in a consultant in to do the new build. And quite frankly, we can look at this other numbers, but, you know, I think that it's appropriate to have our team, who, it's my understanding we designated, work with Mr. Menarski on that. And, you know, again, for further discussion, we can talk about that later on. At this point in time, to me, it's very premature to talk about something that we don't have. Laura?
So I just want to clarify that, you know, what we're talking about is something that the BET discussed amongst itself. It was a new cost estimator project. There was a lot of discussion about the parameters. And I don't think it's fair to have what we're trying to do internally hold up the building committee. I think Mr. Waters said it at the outset. The building committee has held 53 meetings. They've done an incredible amount of work over this period of time. And I think when you're talking about the charter, I think we all need to be mindful that we're not going to spend construction money until there's MI. I mean, we need to apply for the state grant. We need to show that we have full appropriation without conditions. But there's obviously other steps that need to be taken before the funds get expended for construction. This allows them to go to construction documents, they'll go out to bidding. There's a whole other, I mean, as you know from being on building committees. So I think that, you know, the comment that this is premature, that we're not following normal town processes, I'm just not seeing that, because I think we've followed the town processes. I mean, I think they've done all the work. They're ready to go. We're facing a deadline of June 30th next week. You know, we were hoping that we'd have Central Middle School ready to go. I mean, they are making good progress as well, but based on the last building committee, it looks like the earliest they can go for supplemental funding would be September. They're not quite at schematic, but they are expected to have schematics by the end of next week, and then they're supposed to go out for their construction estimate as well. So we've got two big projects to deal with. This one's ready to go, and I think it's frankly unconscionable not to give them the funding that they need to meet the state deadline. They're ready to go.
So they have the money that they can continue all of their work, and per the Central Middle School.
They need the full
excuse me,
appropriation. They do. To file for the grant, they need the
Per
authorization.
the Central Middle School Building Committee and 3 contractors who signed, the owner's rep, the architect, and the contractor, there is more flexibility in terms of applying for the construction funding reimbursement, and that can be done during the year. Now, we have never had, although we've asked for additional information, and, you know, quite frankly, even at the BOE meeting a couple of days ago, there were no further comments from either, you know, Superintendent of School Jones or, you know, our Chief Operating Officer for the schools, Mr. Leviton, with any additional information. And, you know, that's the knowledge that I'm dealing with at this point in time. So, can we take a vote?
I'd like to clarify one point you talk about. You mentioned about an additional process for getting the state funding to be able to proceed with construction next year. That requires special legislation. That requires our legislators to rely on relationships and trading information with people to get support for special legislation, whereas we have a process in front of us that doesn't call on our legislators to use whatever political pull they may have for this particular thing that may be needed for something else that we need. And I think when we talk about this condition for additional information, there is additional information available, presented at the Board of Ed meeting, available to be presented to discuss here, which is not being permitted, that would provide some of the expectation of what we wanted from, what you wanted from a BET process. I have to say I did not support it, and we still don't have an estimator on hand. And so for an internal BET new initiative to hold up the amount of work that's been put into this so far does not seem to
This is
make
not
sense to
holding up
me.
any work, Leslie. I'm ready to take a vote, okay?
Yeah, and can I just comment on process? Typically, budget committee meetings are a week prior to the full BET meeting, so now we have about an hour gap between the budget committee and the full committee. So I have no questions on the new construction documents because I simply haven't had the time to review them. We've had less than a day where most of this information has been in front of us. I do have some comments to make on the new construction, and considering the full BET is going to meet an hour from now, I just don't want to have to duplicate it. So I just want to be clear that from a process standpoint, today's special meetings are really just an accommodation to make sure we can get this in front of the community today. So just for efficiency purposes, I'm going to hold off. I'm absolutely ready to vote, so if you want to take the vote, please.
So, yes, I mean, we are, that's a good point, Nisha. We're all working to accommodate the Board of Education. And so I will take a vote. So those in favor? So Leslie and Laura. Those not in favor? And I'm not, and those abstaining. So that vote is 2-1-1, and thank you. So now we have the bonding resolution. And so the bonding resolution is identical in amount to the requested application that was just approved. And so it takes our normal format, and it was prepared by the Finance Department. So do I have a motion to approve? And this is how we're going to finance the request, which is the way we normally finance our large capital projects. So do I have a motion to approve the bonding resolution?
I'll make the motion to approve a bonding resolution for $39,796,000.
Do I have a second?
A second.
So motion made by Ms. Moriarty, seconded by Ms. Erickson. Those in favor? So that motion passes 4-0-0. So now we have a third item on this. And this is the release of conditions on the Oak Greenwich School, and that's for the additional funding that takes place after, what would normally take place after the MI, but let me read the three conditions that are being released. The three conditions that are being released or being by, this motion. Completion, number one, completion of a BET independent estimate of the partial renovation of Oak Greenwich School per the October 2021 BOE Ed specs versus a new school with an equivalent capacity at the same location or elsewhere on the site if applicable. Two, BET approval of an itemized renovation budget if the partial renovation estimate is greater than $24.5 million. 3, municipal improvement and approval by the P&Z Commission of the project preliminary site plan approval through the RTM appeal process. So those are the three conditions that we approved at the BET meeting in early April. Do I have a motion?
I'll make a motion to release the conditions on the $1,086,000, and I'd like to make a comment if it's seconded.
Can I ask, Leslie, are we releasing conditions or are we waiving conditions? I don't know that it matters
I don't
at the end of the day.
I think we're releasing because I don't think we have any way we can do otherwise. I'm not sure. I've never heard of waiving conditions ever before. And I think if you were considered that, you should have notified us, because I don't know the answer to that question. I think we're releasing conditions.
I think
I've never
I-
heard of anything other than
I
that.
think Laura's point might be, Ms. Erickson's point might be right, because releasing means we've fulfilled them and then we're letting it go. Waiving means we're not going to allow for them. But I think the intention here is to waive, even though the terminology is release, if that's helpful.
Well, I think this
Nisha,
gets
thank you, it is.
complicated. I think that gets complicated because I don't know whether we have any authority as approved by the RTM when they approve the budget to waive conditions versus releasing them. I mean, I'm really, I don't know the answer to you.
All right, so I'm going to second Leslie's motion so we can have this discussion. And then I think, Leslie, do you want to continue? I do have a question, but I'll let you continue.
I just, okay. So, which Leslie are you talking to?
I was Leslie Byrne, who made the motion.
I just want to highlight that releasing or waiving these conditions is important as it relates to the approved amount. Therefore, if there is not a vote by this body in favor of that, then I will return to the additional appropriation motion to increase that by the $1,086,000. Because in order to have the appropriate budget approved for the state, we need to release these conditions.
Okay. Okay, we've said the conditions, so are we ready to take a vote? No, Laura?
I wonder if we could get an update from our comptroller about condition number 1, about the cost estimator. I know in the last comptroller's report, he had gotten some estimates, was waiting for one, but if you wouldn't mind giving us an update on where it stands, I think it's appropriate at this time.
I have no update.
It hasn't started, though.
So did we get more than the one bidder?
We got 4 bids, 3 of them exceeded the 15,000, and the 4th bid is being considered as far as whether or not they're qualified.
Is there any reason, if you decide to award a contract to one of the qualified bidders, that this process couldn't happen concurrently?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
If you decide that you have a qualified bidder that meets the budget, if you awarded the cost estimator project, could that continue concurrently with moving forward?
I would prefer not to comment any more on this process.
Okay, thank you.
Are we ready to vote on this? Okay. Those in favor of the release of conditions on the $1,086,000, and again, I understand what your comment about waiver, but I only know about release of conditions.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, I think number 2 has been satisfied. I think number 1 and 3, for reasons out of our control. But anyway, let's vote.
So those in favor? 2. Those against? Those abstaining? And that motion has passed 2-1-1. So do I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make the motion to adjourn at 9:48.
And I'll second.
9:48. Leslie Moriarty. Those in favor? Okay, so that motion has passed. I'm sorry? I'm sorry?
They're asking who made the motion to adjourn and who seconded. It was Leslie Moriarty and
Leslie
Nisha.
Moriarty made the motion, I'm sorry, and Nisha Aurora seconded that motion, and that motion passed 4-0-0 at 9:48. So I thank everyone who's attended, and we look forward to seeing you, I guess, at 11 o'clock. Thank you very much.